I haven't commented on this discourse before, but I really don't understand this anti-Tom Holland Peter Parker conversation. And I especially don't get the negativity that centers the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. This is exactly what we'll be talking about in today's video. So as I mentioned, today we are talking about the MCU Spider-Man debate, and this happens to be occurring on the day Spider-Man Brand New Day is scheduled to start filming. Following the conclusion of No Way Home, I was super optimistic for what we could see in Brand New Day, because as much as I do like the MCU Spider-Man trilogy, I felt like the latter two entries did stray away from what I loved about Spider-Man Homecoming, and what I really find interesting about Spider-Man stories and Spider-Man as a character, and that is the balance of a larger-than-life superhero drama mixed in with a coming-of-age story about a teenager. These elements did carry over into Far From Home and No Way Home, but those movies are much more based on the spectacle of Spider-Man as a superhero compared to Peter Parker as a high schooler. But I have to say, as much as people loved those movies when they released, in the last couple of years people have soured on them. And that brings us to a specific character who I don't think I've mentioned on this channel before. Earlier today I saw that Supes, a popular comic book movie influencer, went on a podcast and started talking about how much he disliked Spider-Man Homecoming. And despite public favor kind of going away from the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, the response to what he had to say was largely negative. Now, Supes is kind of the epitome of the comic book influencer who has never read a comic book before. Instead of comparing the movie based on its merits to any Spider-Man comic book, he decides to directly compare it to the Sam Raimi movies. Now, don't get me wrong, the first two Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies are certified classics, but they were far from the most authentic representation of Spider-Man. And again, I don't have a problem with that at all. I love those movies, but I would never use them as the basis for what I think Spider-Man should be like. An equivalent comparison would be basing any adaptation of Batman off of the Dark Knight trilogy. I think they are some great movies, but I would never use them as the basis of what I think Batman should be in any future adaptation. And his number one point when using the Raimi movies as a basis for what Spider-Man is supposed to be is saying that Peter Parker is supposed to want to be a normal guy, but his responsibility as Spider-Man is what pushes him to be a hero, which is evident in the Raimi movies, but Tom Holland's version of the character wants to be a hero and doesn't really care about being Peter Parker, saying that the only consequence he faces in Homecoming is losing Tony Stark's Spider-Man suit. And he cannot be any more wrong about this point. Peter Parker is still in his origin phase as Spider-Man. Now, we don't know the full story of what happened with Uncle Ben in this universe, but I felt like by the time that we reached No Way Home, it was pretty clear that we were seeing the Spider-Man origin happen over the course of 3 different movies. Now, at the beginning of Homecoming, there is nothing more that Peter Parker wants than to be seen as one of the Avengers. He got a taste of what it was like to be a hero, and in turn begins giving up all of his personal commitments. But as the movie continues, Peter begins to learn. He goes on a journey that shows him how important those things were to him. This culminates with him messing up in front of his idol, but at the same time receiving the opportunity to reconnect with his personal life. He wasn't seeing being a hero as a responsibility before that moment. He saw it as something fun to do. He saw the superhero life as glamorous until something really bad happened. And that brings us to the climax of the movie. For the first time, things start to look brighter for Peter Parker's personal life. He takes the girl he had a crush on to the homecoming dance, and that's where the call of responsibility begins to rear its head. He receives the option to go and enjoy the dance with his crush and his friends, or he could go be a hero, not because he wants to be, but because it's the right choice. And this is a theme that carries over to each of the MCU Spider-Man movies. Far From Home is seen from the inverse. He now wants the enjoyment of being a teenager and to put the responsibility of being Spider-Man on hold. And when Quentin Beck gives him the opportunity to ditch his responsibility, he takes the opportunity and pays for it later. Spider-Man and Peter Parker as a character is about balance. The inner conflict of Peter Parker is always centered around desire versus responsibility. And this comes to a head in No Way Home. And that movie follows him as he continuously faces the consequences of the choices he made before. before. He has the desire to keep his Spider-Man life and Peter Parker's life separate once again. The consequences from trying to erase the past results in different characters from the multiverse appearing on Earth 616. And this is what I really like about Spider-Man No Way Home, is that each of the lessons that Peter Parker learned in the earlier movies play a role here. When Peter catches each of the villains from the alternate universes, Strange gives him the option to just send them back right away and clean up the entire mess. Peter has what he wanted, but he's faced with a difficult decision seeing how these characters might die, and that would be on him. The responsibility that he learned in the earlier two movies play a role in his decision to fix everything, but that choice had its own consequences, resulting in the death of Aunt May. He's given the easy opportunity again to just send each of those characters back to their universe of origin, but after a discussion with both of his multiversal variants, decides his responsibility is to try and help them. And this is another crucial choice that Peter Parker, having not gone through the events of Homecoming and Far From Home, probably would have made a very different decision. And that decision results in the consequence of everybody forgetting who Peter Parker is. And if you really think about it, this is all Peter Parker from the beginning of Homecoming wanted, to only be Spider-Man. I know I really harped on one specific criticism of these movies, and I do understand some of the other criticisms people have. No Way Home specifically gets a lot of flack due to the visual effects of the movie, but I don't really blame any of the creatives behind the movie. It was made during the peak of COVID, and honestly, it's a miracle this movie was completed when it was. And I understand that Jon Watts as a director doesn't really have a big creative style. I always see shots from his movies compared to the Mark Webb Amazing Spider-Man movies and the Sam Raimi movies. And yeah, I agree that a lot of the MCU movies prioritize matching the style of the earlier movies in the franchise compared to making big stylistic choices. There are exceptions, but the Spider-Man trilogy, aside from a few sequences, isn't shot with the same style as the Sam Raimi movies or even the Amazing Spider-Man movies. But I still maintain that these are really solid Spider-Man movies, and as a 3-act origin story, I think it works really well for establishing Spider-Man in the MCU. I'm really looking forward to Brand New Day and to see how they build on that origin, but we are going to have to wait and see what that movie ends up looking like. I feel like with Destin Daniel Cretton behind the camera, we are in good hands, and hopefully with this upcoming trilogy, we see them return to a much more street level and personal story similar to what we saw with Homecoming especially. I genuinely think Homecoming is the best of the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. I think it might even be my second favorite live-action Spider-Man movie behind Spider-Man 2. But I think that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you leave a like on the video if you enjoyed what I had to say, subscribe if you want more content, and leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts on this. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next video.